Okay, what you see in front of you is your basic plot structure diagram that is commonly used in language arts classes and will be used in this one. And you're going to be taking notes structured along the same lines. We're going to be doing some drawing in class today. But we're going to focus mostly on plot. Plot basically is, and I'll type in the text here, plot refers to the events in a play or a story. And generally speaking then, those events happen usually with a pattern to them, and they usually have terms that go with them. And so we're going to learn about setting, conflict, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. So setting is the time and place where the story takes place. Conflict then refers to the main trouble on the horizon, or the problem that must be solved. For the sake of Julius Caesar, our conflict's going to be about, going to be based upon the main character, the main protagonist, Marcus Brutus, and as to whether or not he joins the conspiracy, why he joins it, and then ultimately what he does while he's in it. Rising action then is the next part, and that refers to where the plot becomes complicated. And then the climax refers to then the point at which where the conflict is taken head, and we're going to move it on head on. Then we also have what's called falling action. Once the main character or characters or the group of people have faced the conflict head on, there's a lot of repercussions and things that need to be unraveled or solved between the then and the end of the story. So the falling action refers to the unraveling of the conflicts and repercussions of the climax. And then last but not least, when we get to the resolution, what you'll notice then is that the world has changed, and actually put a semicolon there, so we call it the state of the world at the end of the story. So these are the basic terms used to describe most plot structures. Now, what's unique about Julius Caesar and Shakespearean plays in general is that there's kind of a pattern to how all Shakespearean plays are structured. These two things, setting and conflict, are always established in Act 1. In Act 1, that's basically everything of the play is started in Act 1 as far as setting and conflict are concerned. You learn who's there, what they're about, for the most part, and you learn what the problem is in a Shakespearean play. Then when we take a look, then it's going to be kind of difficult for me to get a circle around this, make sure. Then this part, and let's see, we'll make it shaped kind of like this. Whoops, Control Z, and Control Z. We'll actually kind of go. The rising action always takes place in Act 2 of the play. Things are becoming more complicated, the intensity is rising, and then the climax always takes place, this is where it's taken head on, always takes place in Act 3. So, with that being said, whoops, that's not what I picked. I picked that. We're going to go Control Z, and we're going to go. This always takes place in Act 3. Act 3 is the point at which the conflict is taken head on, and all of the actions that problems that needed to be solved get faced, and then the net result is that it either causes more problems or leads to the downfall or the rising up or the fixing of all of the problems leading up to it. in a tragedy, it tends to be the point where things get really bad for the main character. Like he's done what he's supposed to do, or he's come to a point where there's no turning back. And then basically Acts 4 and 5 are like the road to downfall. And in fact, too, if I move on then to the falling action, and I'm going to see if I can't move my little circle. No, that's what I want to move that. Falling action always happens then in Act 4 and into Act 5 sometimes. It doesn't necessarily, like, there's no cut border between the two, but just heads up, Act 4 is usually falling action. And sometimes falling action can start as early as Act 3. But then what you'll notice too then is our Act 5, then usually the last couple of scenes of Act 5 are when the resolution is done. So this part tends to take place in Act 5. Now what you'll notice is that every Shakespearean play has 5 acts. And the reason it has 5 acts is because Shakespeare is following an old mode that's followed from the ancient Greeks. The ancient Greeks are really, if you read Oedipus Rex or any of the works of Sophocles or Aeschylus or anything, they did follow a similar thing where they had basically a setting conflict, a rising action, a climax, a falling action, and resolution. So this is an archetypal pattern in most Western plays if we go back to the ancient times and into Shakespeare's time. So you can predict, generally speaking, without even reading a play, what the objective of Act 1 is. Usually Act 1 is to get the audience interested, to establish a setting and a conflict. Act 2 will always be something that adds to the intensity and the complexity of the conflict. Act 3 is when the conflict is taken head on, or the actions of the problem are taken head on. And starting at that point all the way through Act 5 is when all of the repercussions and problems that are created by taking on the conflict come to a head. And the resolution is basically at the end of the play or the story, how has the world changed? What is different about it? And Shakespeare's very good at the end of Act 5 in every play. Basically, the most powerful or important character is the one that speaks to close every play. And with that being said, just as a spoiler alert, but Octavius Caesar has the closing lines in the play Julius Caesar for a reason. It's because he's the guy who's the most powerful and is going to be in charge, even though Mark Antony is standing right there next to him. But ultimately, we know that Octavius Caesar eventually engages in a civil war with Mark Antony and overcomes him, and then Pax Romana takes place, etc. But this is basically what you can predict for Julius Caesar.